You've heard from numerous active duty law enforcement personnel that the ban on handguns from licensed individuals will have no meaningful benefit to public safety. You've heard numerous retired members of law enforcement say essentially the same thing. You've heard from an exceptional criminal defense lawyer that the handgun ban won't change the behavior of criminals or their level of access they have to illegal firearms. You've heard from sports shooting organizations that the ban will hurt them in the short term and extinct them in the medium term. You've heard from gun owners that their property will be taken from them by no fault of their own whatsoever, and that their identity and their culture is repugnant and there's no place in Canada for them. Now, I'd suggest that law-abiding, licensed firearm owners are deserving of respect and they're just as entitled to their place in Canada as anyone else, as outrageous as that might sound. Members of the committee, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to chat with you. I really appreciate it. And Mr. Chairman, there are some provisions in this bill, or at least maybe the motivation behind them, that our group can support. And the reason I say that is because we want a safer Canada too. In fact, I might add that we share a lot of the same safety concerns as a lot of the individuals and groups that you've heard in this committee so far as well. So we support revoking the license of those who are guilty of domestic violence or those who are subject to a protection order. Granted that the order was proven and justified. That's really important. Obviously, we don't want innocent people being caught up in a new system like that, and we support those kinds of things because they just make sense. We obviously don't want the wrong people being able to legally buy guns. Although, in my experience, that and a lot more already happens. Currently, anyone can contact the police at any time if they have a safety concern involving firearms. It's taken very seriously, and the police have the legal ability to search and seize almost anything, depending on the level of concern they have for public safety. So, there are other provisions in the bill that, of course, are absurd. I think most people realize that already. There's a new charge for modifying a cartridge magazine. It's already a very serious criminal offense to be in possession of a cartridge magazine that can contain more than the prescribed number of rounds. And the possession offense is the only one you could ever really prove anyway, unless you caught someone with a prohibited cartridge magazine in one hand and a file or a drill bit in the other. It really doesn't serve any practical public safety purpose, that provision. Another example, unfortunately, is raising the maximum penalty for firearm trafficking from 10 to 14 years. I'm not aware of anyone ever that got 10 years for firearms trafficking. I'm not, and I don't know that because I haven't sat on CCFR for days on end, but I have never heard of that. But I've heard a lot of the contrary, and you guys have heard that as well, I think, from law enforcement professionals. Yeah. So that measure ends up being a little bit meaningless too. So when I look at those two measures, it just says to me that these are opportunities for tough on crime talking points, and I just don't think there's a place in legislation for that kind of stuff, right? So it's a bit of a concern. Now, of course, we're most concerned about the handgun ban. And I understand the limitations of this committee process, why we're here, but I will just offer a little bit of perspective, and we can talk about the provision after that. I guess saying it simply, the handgun ban is unjustified. The committee heard some great information in this process and obviously some blatant misinformation. You've heard from numerous active duty law enforcement personnel that the ban on handguns from licensed individuals will have no meaningful benefit to public safety. Here's a quote from the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. We believe that a handgun freeze is one method of reducing access to these types of firearms while allowing existing law-abiding handgun owners to practice their sport. Fair enough. However, we continue to maintain that restricting lawful handgun ownership will not meaningfully address the real issue, and they go on to talk about gangs and other criminal activity. Right from the Association of Chiefs of Police. You've heard numerous retired members of law enforcement say essentially the same thing. You've heard from an exceptional criminal defense lawyer that the handgun ban won't change the behavior of criminals or their level of access they have to illegal firearms. You've heard from sports shooting organizations that the ban will hurt them in the short term and extinct them in the medium term. You've heard from gun owners that their property will be taken from them by no fault of their own whatsoever, and that their identity and their culture is repugnant and there's no place in Canada for them. Now, I'd suggest that law-abiding, licensed firearm owners are deserving of respect and they're just as entitled to their place in Canada as anyone else, as outrageous as that might sound. For non-gun owners, the nuclear option of gun bans sounds reasonable only because it's predicated on the idea that handgun ownership is some frivolous, self-centered, unnecessary hobby. It ought to just be swept away along with these 650,000 people that are licensed to own handguns in Canada. So I'll tell you that that does not align with reality at all. I don't envy you for having to deal with a bill like this, but I would ask that you explore other options to mitigate the illegal handgun problem, which we all can see very plainly, and before supporting a ban that affects only those who comply with the law. So I appreciate your time and I'd be happy to answer any questions.